directeur du Centre d'information des Nations Unies pour l'Afrique francophone, basé à Dakar. On m'a demandé de modérer le panel d'aujourd'hui, cette conférence de presse régionale. On a une équipe de directeurs et aussi le représentant spécial adjoint du secrétaire général qui vont nous aider à avoir un aperçu de la situation à l'Afrique de l'Ouest et même à l'Afrique centrale avec la situation provoquée par le COVID-19. This press conference will be done in English and in French. So the presenters will use whichever language they feel more comfortable, and also journalists will be able to ask their questions in English or in French later on. Alors, comme je disais, les organismes des Nations Unies qui font partie du United Nations Sustainable Development Group, du groupe de développement durable des Nations Unies pour l'Afrique, ont voulu ouvrir leurs portes ou leurs écrans pour parler avec les médias de toute la région et voir et comprendre mieux la réponse qu'on est en train de faire avec la pandémie de COVID-19. United Nations agencies in West and Central Africa are organizing this virtual press conference to brief on the rapidly evolving situation on the coronavirus disease pandemic in the entire region. So it's not for me to talk because there's some people that can talk much better than me on this issue. And first of all, we are very honored to have His Excellency Mohamed Ibn Shambas, a special representative of the Secretary General for West Africa and the Sahel and the head of UNOWAS. Monsieur Shambas, si vous êtes là, the floor is yours. USG Shambas from UNOWAS, are you online? We have at this moment 91 people online. And I just got a message that Mohamed Shambas is still trying to connect. Let me then just explain you a little bit how will this press conference continue. After the presentation and the overall outlook of Mohamed Shambas, we will have the chair at interim of the regional United Nations Sustainable Development Group for West and Central Africa and regional director of UNFPA, Mr. Mabinge Ngom, that will give us a more detailed presentation of the work of all the different agencies in the region. After that, we will proceed with also some short presentations on the different elements of concern. And when this is done, we will open the floor to everybody. I guess now, Mr. Shambas, are you online and ready? USG Shambas, I think you have your microphone unmuted, so you are all set to deliver your presentation.
Bonjour. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Bonjour tout le monde. J'espère que vous allez bien. La pandémie de COVID-19 a bouleversé le monde. Son impact est multiple et complexe. L'Afrique et notre région ne sont pas épargnées. Comme l'a indiqué le secrétaire général, M. Antonio Guterres, et je cite, « La pandémie menace non seulement le développement, mais amplifie également les risques d'instabilité, de troubles et de conflits. » Fin de citation. Les projections de la Commission économique des Nations unies pour l'Afrique montrent que cette crise sanitaire entravera davantage la capacité déjà fragile des pays de la sous-région à fournir les services de base, à créer des emplois notamment pour les femmes et les jeunes et à répondre aux menaces nationales et régionales contre la paix et la sécurité. Il est vital d'endiguer cette pandémie afin d'éviter l'aggravation de la situation humanitaire déjà désastreuse, en particulier dans le Sahel et le bassin de la Tchad. La solidarité de tous les acteurs est le socle d'une réponse coordonnée et efficace. Dear colleagues, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the UN remains mobilized and determined to continue its unflinching support to the region. The assistance provided by the UN entities represented today by my colleagues of the regional UNSDGs is being reinforced by important actions undertaken by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. For example, the launch of a $2 billion global humanitarian response plan to support the world's poorest countries fight COVID-19, and the call for an immediate ceasefire in conflict areas to ease the delivery of humanitarian assistance to the most vulnerable to COVID-19. Advocating for more international solidarity in terms of financial aid and exchange of expertise, as well as debt relief for African countries. To this end, I welcome the decision by the G20 to freeze the debt obligations of several countries, including some ECOWAS countries. I also applaud the call by President Macky Sall of Senegal and President Mahamadou Issoufou, chairman of ECOWAS, and which was supported by the ECOWAS heads of state, for the cancellation of the public debts and the rescheduling of the payments of private debts of African countries. Regional efforts are instrumental to eliminating the COVID-19, and they must be supported. The extraordinary summit of the ECOWAS heads of state and government on COVID-19, which took place on 23rd April, demonstrates the engagement of the countries of the region to fight the pandemic and mitigate its impacts. Key decisions have been taken, for example, allocation of at least 15% of annual budget to strengthen the healthcare systems of each member state and support to the African Union COVID-19 Response Fund instead of creating a new sub-regional fund. Opening of humanitarian transport corridors for medical and other personnel to enable them transport and deliver required personnel, equipment, and materials. Development of joint response plans taking into account the fight against the spread of the pandemic and a post-pandemic economic recovery plan. Appointment of President Buhari of Nigeria as champion to supervise the COVID-19 response and eradication process, and the establishment of a ministerial coordinating committee on health, finance, and transport to coordinate regional efforts to fight the pandemic under the supervision of the champion. Issuance of a long-term treasury bill and bonds to finance critical investment needs to support the private sector and revive economies. Provision of substantial support to the social sectors, distance learning tools, strengthening of health systems and facilities, easy internet access, etc. And for the most disadvantaged segments of society, that is putting in place social safety networks. Deployment through the central banks, tools, means, and significant liquidity to support the financial sector, in particular, banks and financial institutions, in providing assistance to the private sector, especially small and medium-scale enterprises and microfinance institutions, in providing support to the informal sector. As we're all united to fight the spread of COVID-19, it is crucial that all human rights must be respected. The UN is advocating for a people-centered response that engages communities affected by COVID-19, respects human rights and inclusion, gender equality, and dignity for all, particularly migrants, refugees, and those on low income, and vulnerable populations in countries with weaker health systems facing existing humanitarian crises and that are at great risk. This is the most challenging crisis in the world, and in fact, the one that has been faced since the Second World War, the most challenging crisis the world has faced since the Second World War. This virus is a threat to all humanity, regardless of nationality, ethnicity, or faith. We will get through this crisis, but only if we act together and in solidarity with one another. Thank you very much. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, USG Chambers, for your words. I think we all agree that the people-centered response is the only way to move forward in this crisis. That is a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, and it's a social crisis. However, health is always kind of the first question that comes out of our minds and most of our journalists. So for that reason, we're going to give the floor first, after you, to Dr. Matshidiso Moeti, the Regional Director for the World Health Organization for the Regional Bureau of Africa, to give us an overview of the health crisis of this pandemic. Dr. Moeti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon. First to Undersecretary General Chambers, my fellow regional directors, our colleagues from the press, thank you so much for having joined us this afternoon for this press conference. Bonjour à tout le monde. Merci de nous avoir joints pour cette conférence de presse. Our discussion today is timely because in recent weeks, cases have increased dramatically in countries in West and Central Africa. The sub-region is now accounting for over half of the cases, 54% in the WHO African region, which is most of sub-Saharan Africa plus Algeria, and 35% of the deaths. Among the 47 countries in the WHO African region, 12 are reporting community transmission, and 8 of these countries are in West and Central Africa, meaning these are countries in which the virus has gone beyond The importation by travelers has gone beyond clusters around families or as associated groups and generally into the population. The sub-region also accounts for 9 of the 14 countries reporting clusters of cases in our region. So far, there are 11,000 confirmed cases in West and Central Africa. And I will say something in a minute about the extent of detection, testing, and what this number might mean. And 300 people have sadly lost their lives. From the first 3 cases in Senegal 9 weeks ago, the pace of the epidemic has accelerated. And in the week of 13th of April, cases increased by 113% in Central Africa on average, and 42% in West Africa, but starting from a higher base in terms of the number of cases. If control measures do not change dramatically, cases in West and Central Africa will double almost every week. The spread of the virus in West and Central Africa is a big concern. Millions of people are already struggling, and USG Chambers has already said, to survive the devastation of armed conflict, of hunger, of displacement, and also of natural disasters. COVID-19 is at the doorstep of some of the world's most vulnerable populations. Countries are working on public health measures which will remain central at every stage in the response to this pandemic. These measures are surveillance and finding cases, identifying those who are infected, testing, isolation of those who are infected to stop transmission to others, tracing their contacts quickly so that they too can be quarantined and isolated to prevent onward transmission from them. We have helped countries as WHO, working with our partners in the UN and the African Union, to prepare for and respond to COVID-19 through advocacy, capacity building, and technical guidelines. Before travel restrictions were put in place, we delivered essential supplies and pre-positioned more than 100 experts across 28 countries to work with governments and our country office teams and partners. In early February, only Senegal and South Africa had laboratories that could diagnose COVID-19, and now 44 countries in the African region can do so, including all the countries in West and Central Africa. We've also helped to train more than 2,000 frontline health workers in infection prevention and control, and in how to manage the cases, people who are ill, through interactive webinars after travel became restricted. In the past 2 weeks, we've replenished supplies in 52 African countries in partnership with the World Food Programme, the African Union, the government of Ethiopia, and the Jack Ma Foundation. This is a Chinese charity. We are continuing to work closely with our sister UN agencies to address the socioeconomic impacts of this pandemic. In addition, most countries have introduced measures to enable physical distancing, and we recognize the challenges in implementing these measures, particularly for low-income households who rely on daily earnings and for people who live in homes where family members live and sleep in shared rooms. Another worrying challenge we are observing in the context of the so-called lockdowns is that they are impacting access to other life essential services. Caregivers are unable to take children to be immunized, pregnant women are sometimes not able to seek antenatal care, and access to food and other services is limited. Vulnerable communities are those most affected. These are challenges that UN agencies are working together to address. Discussion is now going on in some of the countries around easing the physical distancing restrictions. Ghana is one of the first countries to start lifting restrictions, and we can learn from their example. They are relaxing some elements, opening some essential businesses, while schools remain closed and gatherings are still not permitted. They're also averaging around 30 COVID-19 tests per 10,000 population, which is the highest rate in West and Central Africa. In easing restrictions, it's clear that we need to overcome the acute shortage of test kits, and the low-cost test Senegal is developing is a very promising start, which we in WHO are very interested in looking at. In the African region of WHO, countries are averaging 9 tests per 10,000 people, which is very low when compared to, for example, Italy, where they are doing more than 200 tests per 10,000 people. So it is very difficult, in fact, to make comparisons in the numbers we are seeing in West Africa compared to other countries. I'm emphasizing this so that we are not left with the impression that not much is happening in the region and in West and Central Africa. Testing is a fundamental first step to know where the virus is so that we can stop it from spreading. And in Western Central Africa, fewer than 5 tests per 10,000 population are being conducted. You are aware that there is a global shortage of test kits, and we see this as one of the highest priorities for our action in support of countries. We are working urgently with scientists and partners to address this matter so that some of the newer tests that are more freely available can be validated by WHO for use in countries. In addition, to conclude, in easing restrictions, an increasing number of countries are turning to community use of cloth masks, and this can help, particularly in crowded settings. Most communities should also continue to the core preventive measures of hand hygiene, disinfecting surfaces, and physical distancing, and they need help in doing so, particularly the more vulnerable sections of society. We are seeing a wide variation of how masks are being used, and WHO is emphasizing that we need to we are providing guidance in using these safely so that they do not become themselves the cause of transmission of infection. In Sierra Leone, one issue of concern, for example, over 20% of infections are among health workers. In Niger, this is around 15%. By addressing supply shortages of personal protective equipment, which again are a global crisis, we can say, we can support countries to protect their frontline workers. Looking forward, we are using modeling tools and projections to guide countries in anticipating how the pandemic is likely to evolve. These analyses make clear that we need to focus our collective action on containment of the virus. If we start to see widespread community transmission in Western Central Africa, the implications will be very severe. Health systems will be overwhelmed even without considering the needs for ventilation or other specialized care. We encourage countries to ensure that all their healthcare facilities are able to manage COVID-19 clients, and we are working with our partners to expand the availability, for example, of oxygen in countries. In closing, I would like to clarify again that the curve has not been flattened in Western Central Africa, quite the opposite. Community and local transmission is ongoing in several countries, and as countries look to ease restrictions, these measures need to be lifted progressively, taking a step-by-step, data-driven approach towards a new normal with informed, empowered, and actively engaged communities, improved public health capacities, stronger health systems, and mitigation of the social impacts. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dr. Moeti, for this presentation. And I am now honored to give the floor to Mr. Mabinge Ngom, the chair ad interim of the Regional UN Sustainable Development Group for Western Central Africa, and at the same time, regional director of UNFPA for the same region. Mr. Ngom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Damien. Good afternoon, colleagues. And let me start by saying thank you to SRSG Chambers for his introduction remarks. Let me also express our thanks to my colleague Morty, who just provided us with a snapshot on the pandemics. I want to share with you what we, the United Nations Agency Central Africa, are doing in response to the COVID-19, or I would say in support to the effort of countries in the region. Let me proceed in French. Donc, l'augmentation continue du nombre de cas de COVID-19 en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre, une région déjà confrontée à de nombreux défis en matière de sécurité, de développement et d'aide humanitaire, donc suscite une réponse croissante, une inquiétude croissante. Nous pensons donc que toute réponse à cette crise nécessite une attention politique soutenue, mais également un soutien technique et des partenariats innovants pour mobiliser les ressources nécessaires à l'intervention sanitaire immédiate, mais également faire face à l'impact social et économique qui pourrait toucher encore plus de personnes. Toutefois, la réponse à l'épidémie de COVID-19 ne doit pas être faite au détriment des programmes et activités en cours. la stabilisation de la région sur le plan de la sécurité comme sur le plan économique doit rester une priorité si nous voulons éviter de créer une situation humanitaire encore beaucoup plus accentuée. Depuis que le premier cas a été signalé dans la région, le 29 février 2020, les agences des Nations Unies, sous l'égide du groupe régional des Nations Unies pour le développement durable en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre, travaillent sans relâche, la main dans la main, avec les gouvernements pour faire en sorte que la région soit bien préparée et capable à réagir pour contrer la maladie à coronavirus. Comme vous le savez, le vice-secrétaire général des Nations Unies a publié cette semaine un document cadre qui oriente le soutien socio-économique urgent qu'apportent les Nations Unies aux pays et aux sociétés pour faire face au COVID-19. Ce cadre définit donc la manière dont le système des Nations Unies se concentre sur les priorités qui suivent. D'abord, il s'agit de sauver des vies, ensuite de protéger les personnes et après de reconstruire en mieux, parallèlement à la réponse sanitaire menée sous l'égide de l'Organisation mondiale de la santé, à qui d'ailleurs je profite pour rendre un hommage mérité pour tous les efforts déployés ces derniers mois à ce propos. Mais également, nous devons continuer à répondre aux urgences humanitaires, notamment comme prévu dans le plan mondial de réponse au COVID-19 dirigé par le système des Nations Unies. Le cadre de réponse socio-économique comprend 5 axes de travail visant à protéger les besoins et les droits des personnes qui subissent les contraintes de la pandémie. Une attention particulière est accordée aux pays, aux groupes et aux personnes les plus défavorables, les plus vulnérables, qui risquent d'être laissés pour compte. Il s'agit donc de veiller à ce que les services de santé essentiels soient toujours disponibles et protéger les systèmes de santé eux-mêmes. Ensuite, il faut aider les personnes à faire face à l'adversité grâce à la protection sociale et aux services de base. Mais nous pensons également que nous devons protéger les emplois, soutenir les petites et moyennes entreprises ainsi que les travailleurs du secteur informel en adoptant des programmes de réaction et de relance économique. Nous pensons également que nous devons orienter l'impulsion nécessaire en matière de relance budgétaire et financière de manière à ce que les politiques macroéconomiques profitent aux plus vulnérables, mais aussi renforcer les interventions multilatérales et régionales. En dernier lieu, nous pensons qu'il importe de promouvoir la cohésion sociale et investir dans des systèmes de résilience et de réaction dirigés par les communautés. Nous voulons donc, à ce propos, nous pensons qu'il est crucial de veiller à ce que les populations, partout dans le monde, continuent d'avoir accès aux services sociaux et à la protection sociale, et à ce que les personnes, quel que soit leur statut, soient incluses dans les plans nationaux de préparation et d'intervention. L'action des Nations Unies dans le domaine de la protection sociale et des services de base aidera les gouvernements à adapter, étendre et développer les services. Nous pensons également que le droit à la santé est un aspect important. Il conviendrait donc de se concentrer sur les groupes les plus vulnérables et les plus marginalisés en assurant la continuité des services dans les milieux fragiles et en soutenant les efforts qui visent à combler les lacunes dans le suivi des populations vulnérables dans tous les pays, ainsi que dans le contact avec les populations. Nous pensons également que le renforcement de la participation et de la protection au sein de l'espace civique est un aspect important de la réponse. Simplement, nous pensons que si les États ont l'obligation d'éviter la propagation de la pandémie, cela ne doit être un prétexte à la discrimination, à la répression ou à la censure, notamment à l'encontre des femmes, des défenseurs des droits de l'homme ou des défenseurs de l'environnement. Pendant et après cette pandémie, les institutions publiques, la démocratie, le multilatéralisme le dialogue social et l'état de droit seront mis à l'épreuve. Nous pensons également qu'il faut une approche fondée sur le genre. Il est particulièrement important de disposer de données désagrégées par sexe pour concevoir des réponses socio-économiques efficaces et durables, étant donné le rôle que jouent les femmes en tant que travailleuses de première ligne dans le secteur de la santé, y compris, mais aussi en tant que dirigeantes de communautés et en tant que travailleuses dans l'économie informelle. Quelles sont les implications de cette situation pour nous en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre? Il nous faut d'abord avoir un contrôle raisonnable sur la transmission, mais également il nous faut lutter contre la désinformation. Étant donné la faiblesse des systèmes de santé, les lacunes dans la fabrication des médicaments et le manque d'équipements essentiels tels que les ventilateurs, mais aussi la concurrence internationale que suscitent ces produits sur le marché mondial, il est essentiel de contrôler la transmission. Tirant les leçons de l'expérience qu'a constitué la réponse à l'épidémie Ebola en 2014-2015, les agences du système des Nations Unies aident les gouvernements à agir rapidement pour localiser, dépister et mettre en quarantaine les patients potentiels en travaillant activement avec les groupes communautaires pour diffuser les informations, écouter les personnes et intégrer les retours d'informations dans nos stratégies. Certains pays ont d'ores et déjà entrepris un partage de connaissances et une collaboration sur les leçons apprises en ce qui concerne la surveillance des maladies et la recherche des contacts afin d'interrompre la chaîne de transmission. Les États devraient opter pour une surveillance renforcée de la maladie aux frontières plutôt que pour la fermeture systématique des frontières. Les incidences d'une telle stratégie pouvant être dévastatrices pour les populations mobiles et l'économie locale. Pour contrer la dangereuse épidémie de désinformation, les agents des Nations Unies, les médias et les organisations de la société civile inondent l'Internet d'informations scientifiques et vérifiées, permettant ainsi aux personnes d'accéder à des informations qu'elles percevront comme étant nécessaires pour se protéger elles-mêmes et protéger les autres. Défendre la vie, la dignité et les moyens de subsistance des personnes constitue également un axe important de la réponse du système des Nations Unies. Les Nations Unies sont particulièrement préoccupées par l'impact du COVID-19 sur les pays pauvres et sur les populations les plus vulnérables, telles que les migrants, les réfugiés et les personnes à faible revenu. On dénombre 1,3 million de réfugiés, 1,6 million d'apatrides et plus de 5,6 millions de personnes déplacées au sein des pays de la région et des dizaines de milliers de migrants bloqués en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre qui ont besoin d'un soutien urgent. Plus de 19 millions de personnes sont confrontées à l'insécurité alimentaire pendant la prochaine période de soudure, juin à août 2020, dans la région. Si les gouvernements et la communauté internationale n'agissent pas pour remédier à la situation, ce nombre pourrait doubler d'ici la fin de l'année en raison de l'impact socio-économique des mesures prises pour limiter la propagation du COVID-19. Les États doivent donc veiller à ce que les femmes, les enfants et les autres groupes vulnérables qui sont les plus exposés à la violence domestique, y compris la violence sexiste, puissent avoir accès à une protection adéquate. Les services de prévention et de lutte contre la violence à l'égard des femmes doivent être considérés comme un service essentiel de la réponse contre COVID-19. Les Nations Unies appellent donc les familles et les dirigeants à tous les niveaux à protéger les enfants. L'impact socio-économique de la pandémie ainsi que les mesures visant à atténuer la propagation du nouveau coronavirus mettent en danger la vie des jeunes en compromettant des domaines clés tels que l'éducation, l'alimentation, la sécurité et la santé. Les mesures de confinement affecte encore davantage la capacité des enfants à accéder à des services d'eau, d'assainissement, d'hygiène, de nutrition, de santé, d'éducation et de protection adéquats. Les agents humanitaires et les acteurs de développement étant confrontés à de plus grandes difficultés pour fournir une aide vitale, toute chose qui ne favorise pas une paix sociale. Plus de 128 millions d'enfants et de jeunes sont directement touchés par les fermetures d'écoles à l'échelle nationale en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre, en plus des 41 millions d'enfants non scolarisés et âgés de 6 à 15 ans dont faisaient état les estimations avant la pandémie COVID-19. On estime qu'environ 11 millions d'enfants de moins de 5 ans souffriront de malnutrition aiguë au cours de l'année. Et les femmes sont représentées de manière disproportionnée dans les secteurs des services et dans le secteur informel, qui compte parmi les plus touchés par les mesures visant à réduire la transmission du COVID-19. Les pays doivent donc veiller à ce que les mesures visant à stimuler l'économie, comme les transferts d'argent, de protection sociale et les rendre plus inclusifs. Les activités de soins non rémunérées doivent être reconnues et valorisées en tant que contribution vitale.
Je pense qu'on a perdu la connexion avec Magimbe Ngom. Mabingue, tu es toujours là? Bon, alors, en attendant qu'il nous rejoigne à nouveau, comme vous le savez, lui, il a parlé en sa qualité de président par intérim du groupe régional, mais dans la conférence de presse, on a aussi Mme Marie-Pierre Poirier, la directrice régionale de l'UNICEF. On a M. Chris Nicoy, directeur régional du PAM pour l'Afrique occidentale et centrale. Et on a aussi M. Milcin Moutouli, directeur régional de HCR. Alors, s'il y a des questions qui peuvent être adressées, bien sûr, au sous-secrétaire général Mohamed Chambas, à la docteure Moeti de la OMS, mais aussi aux différents directeurs régionaux des agences présents et à Mabingue Ngom en sa qualité de président par intérim. On a énormément de questions. On est presque 120 personnes dans cette vidéoconférence. Alors, ça va être vraiment compliqué de répondre à tout le monde. Je vous prie de faire les questions par chat et en disant toujours les noms et aussi les médias auxquels vous représentez. Please use the chat. We are over 120 people in this video conference, so we cannot really respond to everybody. So please use the chat and put your name and the media that you are representing before the question. I have many that are already, I would say, almost 100 questions, but the last ones that I can see, and please repeat them if you feel that you have not been answered. There is one from Will Brown from the Telegraph newspaper in the UK, asking how are experiences from West Africa's Ebola epidemic in 2014-16 informing governments' reaction to the coronavirus pandemic. I don't know who would like to answer to that question. Maybe Dr. Moeti?
Okay. Yes, thank you for that question. In fact, not only the experiences, but also some of the capacities that had been built in response to the Ebola outbreak in West Africa have been very important for the response to this COVID-19 pandemic. I would say, just to be brief, one of the most important, as already has been said by my colleague, Mr. Ngom, has been to base the action at the level of communities, to mobilize people at the community level for their actions, because this is so important. So the communication about the risk and the communication about the actions people need to take and the ways of listening and getting feedback and understanding the feasibility for people is being done very much working with grassroots community groups, working with civil society partners like the International Red Cross and others, to ensure that people do understand their roles and feel enabled and empowered to play their part in what is happening. In addition to that, we are very much also relying on community networks around surveillance to get people to understand the importance of being examined or being tested if there are contacts. I would say that that is one of the most important aspects that have been learned. The laboratory networks that were put in place in response to the outbreak enabled us to very quickly, as soon as we were able to provide training and the right equipment to be able to penetrate and increase the capacity for testing, that increased pretty dramatically in the region. I would say these are some of the lessons that have been applied here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moeti. We have also some questions that were sent before the meeting, as we were recommending, in order to organize better the questions and answers. Frédéric Bobin de Le Monde Afrique. L'OMS commence déjà par faire objet de critiques sur sa gestion de cette pandémie, surtout avec la position des États-Unis. C'était aussi le cas pour l'Ebola en Afrique. Comment l'OMS compte traiter ces reproches pour éviter de se saper sa notoriété et prouver sa capacité à faire face aux urgences sanitaires de portée mondiale? Quel plan de veille sanitaire pour l'après-COVID-19 en Afrique? Say again?
Plan sanitaire. Quel plan de? Je n'ai pas compris la dernière partie du question.
The veille sanitaire means like the prevention, sanitary prevention for after COVID-19 in Africa.
Okay. Oui. OK, merci pour cette question. Ce que je peux dire concernant le critique auquel vous avez fait allusion, c'est que comme l'OMS, nous avons suivi l'évidence, nous avons suivi les informations disponibles pour conseiller et appuyer le pays à faire face à cette épidémie. Je peux dire aussi que nous sommes prêts pour avoir une évaluation après la fin de cette épidémie, des actions que l'OMS a prises basées sur l'évidence qui était disponible pour l'OMS. Nous sommes très ouverts à ça. Nous sommes prêts à améliorer notre capacité et nos actions, mais nous pouvons dire que nous avons basé ce que nous avons pu faire sur les informations et les évidences qui ont été disponibles. Concernant après, ça, je crois que l'OMS, depuis l'épidémie de l'Ebola, en fait, nous avons beaucoup travaillé avec les pays pour améliorer la capacité de faire face aux épidémies au niveau des pays. Nous avons fait des évaluations indépendantes de capacité de faire face aux épidémies dans presque tous les pays en Afrique et nous avons appuyé ces pays-là à développer les plans pour combler le gap. Ce qui manque, et ça je peux dire peut être en leçon au niveau global, c'est le financement de ces plans-là. Parce que maintenant nous savons quelles sont les faiblesses des systèmes de santé pour faire face aux épidémies. Nous faisons beaucoup de plaidoyer pour que ces systèmes soient améliorés en même temps que nous travaillons pour améliorer le système de santé de façon générale. C'est ce que je peux dire. Ça demande beaucoup de l'appui technique et de l'appui financier international au niveau global et nous faisons le plaidoyer pour ça. Concernant les mesures mises sur place, nous espérons que les mesures d'hygiène, par exemple, peuvent continuer dans des pays parce qu'ils sont bons pour d'autres maladies, la maladie diarrhéique comme le choléra. Nous voulons que les populations aient accès à l'eau qui est nécessaire pour les mesures d'hygiène maintenant. Donc, nous allons travailler avec leurs partenaires pour se baser sur ce qui est en train d'être fait pour améliorer la situation dans le futur. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Moeti. pour vous laisser reposer un petit peu. There is a question from Togo qui est adressée peut-être à des autres agences présentes aujourd'hui. La santé n'est que absence de maladie. C'est un bien-être complet. Alors, comment lutter contre la situation de faim qui risque d'être l'épidémie africaine post-Covid-19? C'est Kofi Logan, journaliste à Santé et Éducation du Togo, qui demande. Je ne sais pas si nos collègues du PAM, Chris Nicoy ou Marie-Pierre de UNICEF, quelqu'un des collègues voudrait répondre à ces questions.
Oui, bien sûr. Ah, choisissez.
Allez, Marie-Pierre, vous êtes dans l'écran.
Please, Marie-Pierre can start. I'll come in after Marie-Pierre, but maybe you repeat it for me in English, so I'm sure I got the question properly.
Okay, so Marie-Pierre will answer in French, and then you will answer in English.
Bon, donc, excellente question. Hein, le risque d'aggravation de la situation dans la région, en particulier pour ce qu'elle touche les enfants, mais plus généralement par cette pandémie. La question est bien ciblée. Nous voyons beaucoup de perturbations des systèmes alimentaires avec également des difficultés au niveau des systèmes de santé. La nutrition, ça dépend de l'accès à la nourriture, ça dépend d'être dans un état de bonne santé. Tout le monde sait que si vous êtes malade, les enfants perdent du poids, et ça dépend de ce qu'on appelle les aspects de care. Et donc, nous, au système des Nations Unies, nous travaillons ensemble, comme l'ont très bien dit mes collègues, sur ces trois volets. Le PAM, avec Chris, pourra développer plus en détail l'aspect nourriture. Avec l'OMS et le FNUAP, les différentes agences, nous nous attachons à maintenir l'accès au système de santé. Vous savez que nous sommes très préoccupés que cette pandémie rend de plus en plus difficile la continuation des opérations de vaccination, l'aspect, la continuité des services de santé de base, que ce soit pour les enfants, mais aussi pour les femmes dans les postes de santé. Donc, maintenir un soutien avec évidemment des méthodologies adaptées, mise en place des gestes barrières, grande accélération de la disponibilité d'eau, par exemple, dans les postes de santé, c'est un deuxième volet d'action. Et puis, sur le CARE, juste un mot, nous voyons que la pandémie se traduit aussi de façon diverse et variée et dans le monde entier avec une recrudescence de la violence. La violence contre les femmes, la violence contre les enfants, les situations de confinement dans le monde développé, mais dans notre continent aussi, et y compris pour cause de stress. Toute cette pandémie fait que beaucoup de gens perdent leur travail, le livelihood, les capacités des familles à prendre soin de leurs enfants baissent. Donc, le système des Nations Unies travaille aussi beaucoup, et nous, UNICEF, avec l'accent plus sur les enfants, sur tout ce qui est la protection sociale, l'accompagnement psychosocial des familles pour que ces trois facteurs se mélangeant, l'accès à la nourriture, la continuation des systèmes de santé et le soutien aux familles pour qu'elles puissent prendre bien soin de leurs enfants ne se traduisent pas en crise nutritionnelle majeure qui est un risque sur nos radars. Je passe la parole à Chris qui va vous raconter ça en anglais.
Merci beaucoup Marie-Pierre pour la réponse. Chris, maybe I will translate very quickly the question. It's from Togo, from Kofi Logan, journalist at Santé Éducation. He says that the health is not only absence of sickness, it's well-being. So how are we going to fight against hunger, which is it can be the real risk after the pandemic post-COVID-19?
Okay, thank you very much, Damian, and I want to thank the questioner. I think maybe a couple of points. The first point I should make is that even before the COVID pandemic reached our region, we were already facing some people who moved. Okay, can I try again? Oh boy. I'm getting an echo here. I hope everybody's muted, please. Okay, let me try again. So I was saying that even before the COVID-19 pandemic hit our region, arrived in West and Central Africa, we were already facing a dire food security situation. Okay, we are already in this region of West and Central Africa looking at, and I think Mabinge touched on the figures in his presentation, of something like 21 million people who, between the months of June, July, August, September, are going to struggle to have enough food in a day to eat. Many of them going to bed hungry. So we already had a very bad situation, which is a result of course, climate, but more importantly, conflict, population displacements, etc. in the region. And on top of this has come the COVID-19. Now, we have done some analysis, and there's the potential that on top of this 21 million, whom we already need to assist with food, so that at least in a day they meet their calorific needs, another potentially 22 million people are also going to fall into that situation because of the COVID-19, that is, struggle to feed their families or to go to bed hungry. And why is that? Because there are lots of people, as we all know, in Africa, living in, in the banlieues, etc., who basically live from hand to mouth. They work today, sell vegetables in the market, or fix something in the street, do something that day in order to eat the next day. And with lockdowns, partial lockdowns, etc., these millions of people, their livelihoods or their means of survival have been threatened. So I want to start first from the context. Then there's another point that I want to make, which is, as we've watched our televisions and listened to the radios, most of the narrative coming from Europe and other places is that this pandemic is affecting more the elderly and less so on children. But if we look at our situation in our region, already before the COVID hit, we were looking at estimates and analysis that showed that something like 12 million children between the ages of 6 months and 5 years of age were already at risk of being malnourished during the lean season, the period I talked about between June and August. And there is a potential for this. This does not take into account the impact of COVID on people who are living hand to mouth, who are struggling today to feed their families and not having enough food, not having enough income to provide for their families, etc. Schools have been closed. 20 million children were benefiting from at least some sort of a meal a day at school. With all these schools closed, 20 million children are now no longer having that one meal a day in school. There are now additional mouths to feed on their parents. And there are evidence from some interviews I've seen from Gambia and others where mothers are saying, now with my meager little income, okay, which is not coming because I can't even do what I was doing to earn, I have to buy more rice to feed more children because my kids are not getting any meal from school. Now, the potential of malnourished children in millions, and if you superimpose the infection by the COVID on them, we could have morbidity and mortality that may not necessarily look like the patterns that we have seen in Europe and other places. To go to the heart of the question, which is, so what must we do? That's why we are asking for the countries who have been supporting these programs and have been helping us to reach the people who need our help to still step up to the plate, in fact, step up more, notwithstanding their own needs in their countries. We are also asking governments, especially for people living in the urban and peri-urban areas, the people who I call people who are living hand to mouth, to be supported and to be helped. These are the sorts of things we need to put in place in order to avoid some of the the immediate consequences and the longer term consequences of the COVID-19 from a health point of view, which was the basics of the question that the gentleman posed. I'll stop there, and I can expand further if needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. I see that Mabinge Ngom is back. Maybe there were some technical problems. We are happy to have him back. Actually, we have now on the screen all the panelists except from USG Mohammed Chambers that might be there, but not with the video on. So we have another question here that was, as I said, sent before the press conference, and it's in French. Si l'on se base sur les chiffres disponibles de contamination et de morts, les continents africains ne semblent pas à cet stade aussi durement touchés que certains scénarios alarmistes l'avaient prédit. N'ont-ils pas fait preuve du pessimisme excessif sur l'Afrique, ou est-on seulement au tout début d'une vague de contamination que va aller en s'aggravant ces prochaines semaines et mois? Et si vous me permettez, parce que la question de Frédéric Bovin de Le Monde Afrique est aussi très liée, dans l'hypothèse d'une résilience spécifique à l'Afrique, comment celle-ci pourrait s'expliquer? Jeunesse de la population, résistance physique déjà éprouvée lors des épidémies précédentes? That's the question. So we have, it's up to you to decide who wants to answer.
Je pense que je peux dire quelque chose, Damien.
Absolument, vas-y. Allez-y. Allô? Unmute the microphone. Mabinge?
Oui, merci, merci Damien. Je crois que je dirais qu'il y a tout. C'est pas une équation avec une seule variable. C'est vrai que les pays africains ont quand même une expérience relativement solide en matière un peu de gestion de pandémie. Je pense que c'est une chose. Mais je crois également que le fait que les leaders des pays africains ont agi suffisamment tôt, en mettant en place un certain nombre de mesures barrières, donc en faisant un peu une bonne mobilisation, je crois que ce sont des variables qui pèsent sur la balance. Et je crois que les pays africains sont conscients de la faiblesse de leur système de santé et des défis que, en tout cas, un nombre impressionnant de cas pourrait poser à un système de santé déjà faible. Et je pense qu'il y a eu quand même un ensemble de mesures qui ont été prises par les pays qui expliquent que certainement la trajectoire qui était anticipée n'est pas, en tout cas jusqu'à maintenant, la trajectoire que les pays africains sont en train de vivre. Donc, je pense que l'un dans l'autre, surtout en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre, je pense qu'il y a un effet, j'allais dire un peu apprentissage, il y a un effet un peu alerte, je pense, qui a fait que les pays africains peuvent être considérés comme relativement mieux équipés que les autres en ce qui concerne en tout cas la préparation.
Merci beaucoup, Mabinge. On me demande de traduire toutes les questions en anglais et en français, mais on n'a pas vraiment de temps, alors ça va être très difficile. Quand même, je pense que cette question est au cœur de beaucoup des autres questions des journalistes. Je vais la traduire très vite en anglais pour si quelqu'un d'entre vous, Dr Moeti ou Chris, veut ajouter, ou Marie-Pierre, en anglais aussi. The question in French is quite clear, and I think it tackles most of the concerns of most of our journalists this afternoon. If we look at the data that we have now on the numbers of deaths, the African continent doesn't seem to be at this stage as terrible as certain predictions were done in the immediate past. Maybe we were too pessimistic about Africa, or maybe we were not. And it's just now the beginning of a trend of contaminations that will be becoming more and more damaging in the next weeks and months. Is there a hypothesis of a specific resilience in Africa concerning maybe the population being extremely young, or also having a specific resistance with so many epidemics and pandemics like Ebola and others that has happened in the past few decades. So now you have the question in English and in French. So those of you that want to add something else to what Mabinga said, please feel free to join.
Okay, if I may,
Sure.
briefly, I think several things have to be taken into account. We cannot say that there is any physical or even environmental reason why there seems to be fewer cases in Africa. I agree very much with Mabinga. The virus came here later than it did in Asia or even in Europe. The virus came into Africa from Europe, in fact. So it was in the course of the explosion in Europe that we started to see European travelers or Africans coming back home bring the virus here. And it took some time for it to spread beyond clusters in somebody's family or in some cases in a church group out to the general population. As I said, we still have a relatively limited number of countries where the so-called community transmission is happening. But at the same time, as the virus was starting to spread in Africa, we started to have a very severe lack of test kits at the global level. You know, the figures that I quoted earlier of the level of testing per by population, for example, are extremely different in what's happening in Africa, in the African region, in Western Central Africa, compared to what's happening in other countries. If we look at South Korea, which had a very aggressive, assertive case finding through testing asymptomatic people approach, they were testing about 116 people per 10,000. As I said, in most African countries, it is below 20 people per 10,000. And it's only a small number that are going between 20 and 30. So I think we're comparing very different situations. Having said that, we are not seeing, I do not think, very many people dying who may be dying of suggestive symptoms. So we're trying to understand the dynamic, but I just like to emphasize that I agree that African governments put in place the containment measures very early because this is experience that had already been put in place in other regions. But at the same time, I feel that we are not being able to seek cases in the more aggressive, assertive way that some of the other regions may have done because of the lack of test kits. And we have to find a balance in our understanding and very much encourage this more active case seeking, because it's the way in which we're going to then isolate those who may be infected, about to transmit to other people, and really control the epidemic. But we don't want to leave the impression that we think there is some innate resistance in African people to this virus, because we know that that is not the case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moeti. We are already almost 10 minutes late or behind the schedule, but I think that question is so important. And I tell you, I'm reading so many questions in the same direction. So peut-être quelqu'un, maybe somebody else, Marie-Pierre or Chris, if somebody wants to add something, I don't know if USG Chambers is still there. I would like to get also your feedback on that key question.
Damien, thank you. I think Chidi Moeti explained, I mean, in all countries, the data that is available is imperfect, but at least there is more data and more results of tests. So the unknown is bigger in our region. The second thing is that the impact will probably be tougher because, as my colleagues have said, in our region, a lot more people start from a much lower base, lower access to water, lower access to health services, lower access to everything. And so while the virus does not discriminate in who it affects, the impact is very different based on all kinds of criteria, and definitely vulnerability is one. So I would join Chidi Moeti to say, saluting everything that's done so far, the learning from elsewhere, taking on the need to find a response that is tailored to context, and where all the very important measures recapitulated by WHO in terms of tests, contact tracing, and public health measures need to be implemented in a way that doesn't totally torpedo vulnerable people and poor people ability to eat tomorrow, take care of their families, continue to put their children in school. So we don't know a lot. We think that we should intensify the preparedness measures together with our government partners, and we should alert the world that no matter what the number of cases is today, our region needs to be very much centrally the radar of global mobilization with our partners to help coach this. With the UN are here and ready, but we need everyone's support. Over.
Chris?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Damien. Just to, I agree 100% with everything that my colleagues have said. The one point I wanted to add to what they've already said is that as part of not letting our guard down to assume that somehow, the impact of the virus may be less, that is why the UN is really in line with the call of the African Union heads of state, asking countries to open humanitarian corridors so that medical supplies, medical experts, health workers, humanitarian workers who will bring the support that these countries, the African countries need in our region and beyond at this time is critical. We need to lean forward. We need to assume and plan for the worst and hope that it doesn't turn out that way. So I want to use this to call on the governments to really quickly open these corridors that the UN and the Secretary General is calling for, so that the health workers, health experts, and other sectors who bring in the expertise that will come and support them during this time, so that indeed the narrative in Africa could turn out differently. And so this is the point that I want to add in addition to what has been said. Thank you.
Damien, let me add just a 30-second bullet point here. No, I think I do concur with my colleague. We definitely need to make sure that we do not send the wrong signal to say that it's over or Africa is not affected or Africa will not be affected. But I think we need to go a little bit deeper and to look at the specific case of Africa. There is no way for Africa and African countries, especially in West and Central Africa, to be successful with a kind of medicalized or a disproportionately medicalized response to COVID-19. Because we know the health system is weak. We know that testing will not be available at large scale. For various reasons, we know. So the fallout is really the community response. The response should be, I would say, more on the prevention. It should be more at the community level than anywhere else if Africa have to contain the escalation of COVID-19. So definitely we need to have a holistic response. We need to be very vigilant. We need international support, but we need good strategies built on what we have learned from previous experiences. Someone mentioned earlier the Ebola. And we all know that in the pandemics, in the epidemics period, 2014-15, the situation was going terribly bad until we put our effort on the community response as the best barrier to protect the health system and to protect a virus that is too fast to be contained by the medical system, be it a high capacity of testing. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mabinge.
I want to say a last word.
We have 120 people joining this press conference. So it shows that there is a high interest on exchanging with you, on getting your feedback, on asking questions. So I think we are going to try and do it as often as possible because there is a need of information. We at the UN Information Center, we are fighting against fake news day and night, producing all kinds of products, as I think most of us are doing. So there will be press conferences very soon. This is not a political debate, but maybe I can give like 30 seconds to each of you, or a minute to each of you, if you want to send a last message about the immediate future for West and Central Africa from your organizations. Maybe Marie-Pierre, if you want to start.
Well, if I have that chance, I cannot resist. It looks like children look less affected in the data so far, particularly compared to adults and the older people. But as what my colleagues have said, when you look beyond the health universe and take a holistic approach, our call is to really engage governments, civil society, all actors in a multi-sectoral response that would have health at the center, but also nutrition, education, social protection. All sectors of societies are needed for the population at large, but a focus on children who may look like they're a bit spared, but it's actually not necessarily the case when all data are known. Let's not let that generation be forgotten because we are all focusing on a pandemic in a more non-disaggregated way. So lots of challenges. The disaggregations of who is most vulnerable will be key. The UN are ready to continue to work together with all partners so that Africa maybe ends up to be a good story. Over.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Pierre. Dr. Moeti.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I'd like to conclude by saying that it's possible, and it's what we need to do to combine a technical evidence-based approach with a community-based approach. Because some of the measures for prevention, even at the community level, are extremely challenging. So I think that data, including data from testing, can help us to target and focus where we can make the most impact for the general benefit. So I very much welcome the emphasis on community-based, what people can do for themselves. I think it can be informed by data, and we need to do our best to make it be targeted based on data, because this is a very delicate balance for both governments and for communities to maintain. So, and I can see that within the UN, we can work together very much to have these combinations of strategies that will move us forward quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris?
Thank you, Damien. Just a last word, and to go back to what I said at the beginning, even before COVID, 21 million people are risking not having enough to eat on a daily basis in our region. Countries, and some of the worst affected countries are countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, northeastern Nigeria, Central African Republic, etc. And with COVID, this even gets worse, potentially doubling. We must sustain those programs that are supporting those millions who are facing acute hunger, because those are, and as my colleague Marie-Pierre was saying, those are people who are eating reasonably well, access to clean water, etc., are important armor in our arsenal in the tool to prevent the morbidity from this COVID-19. We should not forget that. So sustaining those programs in the case of Africa is critical to be able to withstand the worst impacts of the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Mabinge?
Thank you, Damien. I want to thank you and thank all those who have attended, but I want also to thank the regional director team for their leadership, for working together for supporting country offices and supporting governments in the region to deal with COVID-19. So my last word will be really to call for an holistic response, a balanced response, and I fully agree with Chidi. It has to be evidence-based. We can build on what we learn, what we know, what we have seen, and make sure that we address the needs of the most vulnerable, and that we move together and we really live up to the expectation of the UN Secretary General, so that the shared responsibility is backed up with a shared solidarity. That's the way to go. And I do believe that young people have a critical role to play as a resource to contain, to help contain the escalation of COVID-19 on the ground at community level and everywhere. Thank you very much for joining, and very happy that the team, the regional director team, is working together, is supporting countries, and for me, that's the most important thing we wanted to achieve today. So thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much to all of you. I believe USG Chambers had another commitment, but I really want to thank Mabinge Ngom, Matshidiso Moeti, Marie-Pierre Poiré, Chris Nikoi. I think it has been extremely helpful. The feedback I get from social media is all very good. So I am happy that we were able to organize this. And let me just finish with the words of our Secretary General, that I think in his message of March 11 are very, very good to frame what we discussed today. He said, let's move forward with resolve and without a stigma. You can count on the UN to do our part. Let's overcome this common threat together. So with the words of the Secretary General, I'm thanking once again, not only our panelists or our participants in the press conference, but also to over 100 journalists that join us from all West and Central Africa. I want to thank you very, very much for being with us this afternoon. And I really hope we can do this press conference again, because there's a lot of pending questions and pending issues. Thank you very much, and be safe and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Damien. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Il y a quelqu'un qui nous zoom out là. Wow. Dis donc, ça fait bien, non?